Hi, I'm Lily Peterson.
And I'm Paul Wilson. Welcome to Beyond Benefits with Benefits Pro. For this episode, we're talking to Bill Hepscher, founder of RXManage USA and the Canadian Medstore. But first, Lily, I wanted to catch up with you a little bit. We have had a busy little stretch here. We're coming off of our Benefits Pro Broker Expo. We had our 21st annual in Boston. And so I just kind of wanted to chat up with you a little bit about that and get some of your takeaways and impressions. What were some of the things that stood out to you from your time in Boston?
Yeah, for sure. Well, to start out on a personal note, I went to the Celtics game the first night, and that was so fun. I had never been. They lost, unfortunately,
Yeah. Oh,
but what can you do? But it was really cool and very fun to see all the intense Boston fans.
right. Yeah, because it was a playoff game too, so I'm sure it was ratcheted up to a whole new level too.
Yeah, it was intense in a good way.
Yeah.
But on, more of the expo note, it was really good. I like the vibes of the people that show up. It's just you feel the intensity in a good way of fighting the good fight and trying to help everyone. Everyone in each session I was in just kept calling it a community,
Hmm.
which I really enjoyed, and everyone's so lovely to speak to and just so passionate. So it was really, really nice. But what about
Good.
you?
Yeah, I agree. I was going to mention that community thing too, because both live while we were in Boston and then the social media kind of feedback we've received since then, that is one of the words that comes up again and again is that idea of community. And it's so nice because like you said, I feel like there is something going on. It's a movement. It feels like a grassroots movement where a lot of the people that we talk to every day and that come to the show really do feel the energy and the excitement of what they're doing, that they truly are creating change. And so it's so fun in the hallways and in the sessions to kind of feel that vibe. So yeah, I agree with you. Did you have any favorite sessions, either keynotes or some of the breakout sessions that kind of stood out to you?
Yeah, I would say, well, my favorite keynote was Gretchen Rubin. I was reading her book, The Happiness Project, so it was a nice little, segue into hearing the keynote and just happiness is just such an interesting topic.
Yeah, it really is.
Yeah, so it was cool to kind of see that tie into the benefits world and how you can make your everyday life, personal life better. So it's cool that it's in the small things, and I think that relates a lot to this industry of like it's not an overnight change. Like it is just going to be those small movements, those small changes, those small feelings that turn into the big things.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I agree. It was so nice to be able to talk to her. And she had so many insightful points about happiness. And also, she brought up some of the different personality types and the way that those kind of resonate with people, both in the business world and their personal lives. And I have received a lot of feedback. People really resonated with that and enjoyed that part of the conversation too. And you could see everybody afterwards kind of labeling themselves and their coworkers and friends as different types of people. So it's always funny to see which parts of a conversation resonate with people. I had a blast talking to her. And also, of course, BJ Novak was great and so gracious with everybody afterwards. He had quite a line of people who wanted to get selfies and, signing books and all kinds of stuff. But he was
Yeah.
so fun to talk to. I really liked what he said about the idea of I had asked him what advice he would give to his former self. And he actually kind of reversed it and said, if anything, he would probably take some advice from his younger self to be, less tied up in kind of anxiety and just kind of be more confident and go for what you think you can do, whether it makes sense or not. That was one of the
Yeah.
things out of the whole 3 days that really resonated with me. It's just that idea of we're always talking about giving advice to our younger selves, but in some ways, if we look back, there's probably some things that we have learned to do that probably could be unlearned, and we could probably learn a lot from just our previous selves that weren't so tied down.
Yeah, I agree. I also think, I mean, on that topic of how you change and how funny enough you get more anxious as you get older, it feels like.
Mm-hmm.
But I do appreciate that each keynote, it's not directly tied to this world, but everything can still apply to you individually, to your company, to all those things. So it is cool to see that tie in.
Yeah. No, it goes into what we talk about a lot with wellness, where it's a whole person. You can't treat just financial wellness. You can't treat just physical wellness or emotional wellness. And it's the same kind of thing. I mean, whether we're talking about employees or all of us who make up the industry, you have to take into account that these are people, not just numbers or not just one part of their personality. So, yeah, I agree. I also really enjoyed the documentary panel that we had with
Oh yeah.
Lester and Deb and Chelsea and Bart, where we kind of talked about the documentary that's been making the rounds. It's not personal, it's just healthcare. And we got a lot of really good feedback on that too. So, it's just interesting to each year when you put together the agenda, you really hope that you're going to find stuff that resonates with the audience. And so it's always so nice to hear from people and hear that a lot of this has paid off, and so many good breakout sessions too. As always, just we're so thankful for all of the community who, volunteers their time and their knowledge and their expertise to help us create such a wonderful agenda, and just to sit in on some of those sessions and see it all taking place and seeing people engaged and taking notes. It's always just one of my favorite parts about the show.
Yeah, I agree. I think I was in the creative destruction panel when
Mm-hmm.
someone was saying, we're not competition. We go to these events to learn from each other because we're all fighting towards the same goal
Yeah.
and we're all trying to help each other. And I think that's why we get the feedback we get on these sessions, is because they're all there to better themselves, but also better each other.
Yeah, no, for sure. It's one of the biggest changes I've seen in the decade or so that I've covered this industry. When I first started out, there was a lot more secrecy and competitiveness between benefits advisors and other benefits professionals. A lot of people guarding their secret sauce and unwilling to share. And boy, has that changed just, over the last few years, especially. And I think it's exactly what you said. A lot of them realize there's a lot of business out there, and it's very unlikely that they're going to run out. There's plenty of people that need to hear this message, but also they've just gained so much from collaborating and sharing with each other. A lot of them are parts of different mastermind groups, or Health Rosetta or Q4 Live, and all these different groups. And I hear again and again just how much benefit they get from meeting and talking to each other. And again, that whole idea of community is just such an important part of this industry. And especially if you can get it at these live events like the expo and other events that take place around the industry. But even, people that are just doing Zoom calls, or just, group chats. I know Josh Butler and a group of his advisor buddies, he told me they just have like an ongoing Discord chat
Yeah.
pretty much all day long where they're talking business, but also life. And so, yeah, that's what's so great about these, is just seeing the friendships and the relationships that form. It's very rewarding, I think.
Yeah, I agree. And I think, in the expo hall, it was just very high energy, which was, I mean, I feel like most of people that attend the expo are very high energy to begin with, but you could
Right.
just see everyone collaborate, and that continued into the night. And I really enjoy seeing the teamwork, even though they're technically competition. It's just, I think it just shows kind of what you're saying with Josh Butler, is like, they're not just there to make money, they're also there to actually help people, and they're genuinely passionate about it. And you can see it and hear it. And like on our expo website, I think we just uploaded, the photos of everything, and you can just
Mm-hmm.
see the excitedness and collaboration of everyone. And it's just, again, I feel like I just keep repeating this phrase, but it's just so nice to see it all.
Yeah, it really is. And I will just say, from a personal perspective, it's been nice to see you over the last couple of years kind of become more comfortable and start to form those relationships yourselves, because all of us know joining in this industry at first, it can be pretty daunting and intimidating, and you feel a little bit like a fish out of water. And I'm sure that was the case for your first expo. It definitely was for mine. But then to see you over the years, starting to create some friendships both within our team on Benefits Pro, but especially with some of the people in the industry, it's been pretty fun. So it seemed to me like you were a lot more comfortable and able just to kind of enjoy it and soak it all in this year.
Yeah. And honestly, I 1000% agree with everything you just said. It is funny. I feel like when you talk to people about how they joined this industry, they're like, it just happened. It found me. Like, this was not intentional, blah, blah, blah. That I completely feel that. And I'm not even a benefits broker. I'm just covering it and sharing the news and
Mm-hmm.
sharing, all the perspectives and the profiles. But it is funny. I feel like, yeah, I just found it. Like, I fell into it. And now I feel myself every year growing more and more passionate about everything we cover, and, fighting the good fight and helping people who don't have voices, helping them share their voices, and just all of
Yeah.
that. It is funny, that parallel to see.
Yeah. No, you caught the bug just like we all do. I love
I
it.
know.
Well, and two, I will just say, following up on what you mentioned about Boston, I obviously didn't have a lot of time to explore Boston, given my duties at the expo, but
Yeah.
I did sneak out. We both snuck out with a couple of friends the first night, and we got to spend a little time on the north end of Boston, and just happened to stumble across Paul Revere's house, and we went to a nice Irish pub and had some fun hanging out there. And Boston's just an amazing city. I'll say that. I'd never been
Yeah.
before. Loved it, and I can't wait to go back. But then after the expo, I was able to swing over. You mentioned a Celtics game. I didn't make it to that, but I did get to go to a Red Sox game, so I can check
Nice.
Fenway Park off my bucket list. So I've
Yeah.
been to Wrigley, been to Fenway. Those were the big two that I wanted to do. So that was a lot of fun. And then I went down to the Harvard area, which is just a stunning campus. And
Yeah, I love it.
you know me, hit a couple bookstores and had a lobster roll and some clam chowder. So I tried to soak in as much Boston as I could in a short amount of time.
Yeah. I mean, I want to hear your final number of bookstores that you hit.
I think I hit, considering I had about half a day, I hit 4 bookstores.
That's
Luckily,
a good number.
yeah, I've got it down to a science. But I will say it's pretty easy in a place like Boston where,
Yeah.
it's a city that's known for those types of things. It's got museums and bookstores everywhere. So yeah, what a beautiful city. I love it. Like I said, I can't wait to go back.
Yeah, it was awesome. I mean, feel like I just want to plan a trip and hit all the bookstores, hit all the, things you got to check off the list. Like I didn't have time for this, but I really wanted to go to the Sam Adams Brewery.
Mm-hmm.
I love beer and I love breweries. So I was like, that's something whenever I go back, I'll have to do.
Absolutely. Well, maybe we can figure out a way to do it, or maybe in 3 or 4 years, the expo will find its way back to Boston, because I will say also that the Encore where we had it, we got a lot of feedback that it was the best venue we've ever had for the expo. And I agree. It was absolutely stunning. So plenty of reasons to make it back.
Yeah,
great.
Exactly.
Well, I guess we should probably move on to our interview with Bill Hepscher. Again, he's the founder of both RXManage USA and the Canadian Medstore. In this episode, we talk about the chaotic world of prescription drugs, including the current state of international prescriptions, the impacts of the tariffs, some predictions about what's next in the benefit space, and then we end with some calming discussions kind of about the salt life, sailing, and living in beautiful places, which should be a nice little entry point into summer for all of us. So we have all that and more coming up next.
Joining us today is Bill Hepscher. Welcome to Beyond Benefits, Bill.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Yeah, we're so happy you're here. So I say let's just dive into all the questions.
Perfect.
You have quite a few irons in the fire. Can you tell some of our listeners a little bit about RXManage and the Canadian drugstore or Medstore? I'm so sorry.
Yeah, no problem. Yeah, I mean, what do you say? We have about 4 hours to get through this, right?
Oh yeah, time's not an option.
So yeah, just the real quick background of a long story. I started a company called the Canadian Medstore 23 years ago. And the concept of that was to help folks that live in states like Florida who didn't have immediate access. When I say immediate access, meaning somebody that lived in Michigan could drive over to Canada, buy a prescription drug from a Canadian pharmacy and be literally sitting back on their couch in, Detroit 20 minutes later. But if you lived in Tampa, Florida, where I lived, you didn't have that geographic convenience. And we were hearing a lot of stories back then about people that were traveling to Canada because the medications were so much less expensive. And that's when we opened up our company called the Canadian Medstore. We were doing that for years, helping over 10,000 clients order medications from licensed pharmacies in Canada. And when the ACA became law, we had a lot of brokers that were coming to us and agents and consultants. And they said, hey, you're helping our retirees get their prescriptions from licensed international pharmacies. But we're seeing a lot of our companies shifting towards self-funding. And we were thinking that one of the biggest cost drivers for us right now are prescription drugs. So could we do the same thing we're doing for our retirees for our employer clients? And we said, probably, let's look into that. And that's when we created RXManage, which is basically the same concept of an individual getting a drug from a licensed pharmacy in Canada. The only difference is it's sponsored by the employer. So a self-funded employer will pay for the prescription medications for an individual from a Canadian pharmacy, just like an individual could if they lived in Detroit, Michigan. They could drive over to Windsor. They've been doing it for decades, buy a prescription, come back home with it. We do the same thing, except we do it through mail order for the employer market.
Nice. I mean, you guys were pioneers in this space in many ways, and there's a lot of changes happening right now that we'll dive into here in a second. But first, you and I, we've known each other for years, and I feel like we always meet on, exhibit room floors at conferences across the nation. I mean, how much of your job is spent on the road at conferences or going to meet with employers or different things like that?
Yeah, an awful lot. As a matter of fact, my wife, we were together with another couple of days ago. We went to a dinner with them, and they said, "How does it work when you're on the road so much?" And my wife said, "Why the heck do you think it's worked for 17 years? Because he's on the road so much." I kid around a lot that I'm afraid that the kids are going to yell "stranger danger" and the dog's going to bite me when I walk in the house this time of year, because it is conference season, as you know, Paul. I mean, there's just constant events. I was just at a Medicare event in Vegas. I'm going to another Medicare event in Orlando next week. We're going to be doing all the traveling and visiting the different state events for NABIP. So, yeah, I mean, I would say that we probably actively participate in probably 20 to 30, conferences a year. And some of those are the really big prime events like your Benefit Pro event. And some of those are just like local NABIP chapter events where they'll ask us to come out and speak about prescription drug costs. I will tell you one thing, that over the last few years, it seems like we're a lot more in demand. A lot of the local chapters especially are saying, listen, whether you work in the Medicare world or if you work in the employer group market, prescription drug costs are really the one thing that everybody is talking about. And it's impacting so much of the healthcare space that there seems to be a real desire, at least that I've recognized in the last 5 years, especially, that you see a lot of brokers, consultants on the innovation side really looking towards international as a way to lower cost of prescription drugs.
Yeah, I want to talk to you more about that in a minute, about kind of the acceptance and that journey. But generally speaking, I mean, you've been in this space for a long time, and I know that there's been plenty of ups and downs, but right now in particular has to just be a crazy time for you and for your business with all the tariff stuff happening right now and everything else. So give us a little bit of information, like how are you holding up? What's going on? Like, how's it looking?
Yeah, the funny thing is the phone and the email inbox has been probably lighting up more than it has in a long time from just individual clients calling us, asking us about tariffs. I think it's funny because I think the average American, including myself, we knew what a tariff was. We had heard about it in history class, but we didn't really understand it. Now, all of a sudden, tariffs are what everyone's discussing, and we're discussing if it's a good thing or a bad thing and how tariffs really work and who really pays for them. It just makes me laugh, because if you would have mentioned tariff, literally a year ago, no one would have even probably been able to even define really what a tariff is.
Right.
People are concerned about it, but from what we're hearing from folks in DC that we communicate with on a regular basis, is that tariff should not impact individual importation. And you have to understand what we're doing, no matter what, whether it's an employer-sponsored plan or it's an individual buying a drug from a licensed pharmacy in Canada or England or Australia or New Zealand. We're not doing bulk purchases. It seems to me, if anybody can explain it to me, but I don't know if anyone knows the answer, but what seems to me what the Trump administration is focusing on is large purchases of automotives and steel and aluminum and all that kind of stuff, lumber, dairy. We're not looking to say, hey, little Mrs. Smith, who lives in Zephyr Hills, Florida, who's struggling to buy her Eliquis, who's now found she can get it from a licensed pharmacy in Canada. We're not looking at probably sticking a $25 or 25% tariff on her. Number one, I think the political optics of it would be pretty bad. We're going to go after little old ladies that are getting their drugs from Canada because they can't afford them here in the U.S. And now we're going to stick them with a 25% tariff. That's not the intention of it. But people are worried about it, so people are calling us. But hopefully that answers your question about, what are we hearing about it? And we're hearing a lot, but we're also hearing that it shouldn't impact our specific industry, because just so you understand, we're always doing something for personal importation. It's always Mrs. Smith or employee Smith ordering the medication and having it sent to them individual. It's never a bulk purchase.
Yeah, that makes sense. But yeah, to your point, I'm sure that the communication part of it right now is a big part keeping you busy. And it's funny you mentioned the tariffs. I've seen on social media some clips from Ferris Bueller where Ben Stein is droning on, and the class is tuning him out, and it's all about the Holly Smoot tariffs and everything. It's like, that's probably like about how much most of us paid attention in the past, but all of a sudden it's everywhere.
Probably, except for maybe some of your friends that were actually economists or took some higher level economy classes. I know that's some of my friends are chiming in with a little bit more information, but the average person still is just wondering what the heck's happening. And then watching the stock market. I mean, obviously you saw the market the last few days, and then today it's up again. Heck, I think it's up, 6% or something. So just who knows what's going on with all of it. And that's the only thing I would say just like with our business, some of the things that the tariffs, whether you're pro or anti-tariffs, it's the confusion in the market. It's the fact that no one really knows how to move forward. And that's one of the things that we've always talked about with healthcare, is that employers are just trying to do the right thing and provide, healthcare for their employees. But if they don't know what the world's going to look like in 6 months from now, in a year from now, in 6 years from now, it's very, very hard to plan for that. So the world we live in every day, right?
Exactly. Well, and then one more thing I wanted to ask you about as far as kind of current trends is I assume the GLP-1 trends and the explosions that have taken place around, Ozempic and Wegovy and all those are impacting you guys. What are you hearing and seeing as far as just obviously the significant increases to, healthcare costs? And obviously advisors are very focused on that type of thing. I mean, how is all that playing into your world, and what are you hearing from advisors?
Yeah, it's an interesting debate. I think it kind of goes back to our healthcare in general and health insurers in general. Do we want to cover a prescription that maybe will actually help somebody's overall, health, and then does that lower the cost in the long run? Is the cost now worth that? And do we have enough data to really show that they really will be living healthier lives down the road, which will cause there to be less, health care costs down the road? That's kind of I think the high level debate. I think the debate that we're seeing on a regular basis is some frustration on the employer or employee side. An employee who says, hey, I was put on Ozempic. It actually helped me lose weight. All my numbers are coming back okay now, but now I don't qualify for it anymore because I'm no longer sick. So it's like I have to get sick to get it. So that's the frustration we're hearing. The other thing that we hear a lot of concern about from individuals is they were able to source the compounded product often locally. So they weren't being hit, even though a brand name product like an Ozempic might cost $1,100 per pen. So a month's worth of medication would cost $1,100 here in the US. They could get a compounded product from their, local weight loss clinic or from their local pharmacy. And that would just mean they wouldn't have it in a pen form. They would have to draw it out of the vial. But people are saying, well, heck, if I can save that much money on it, I'm willing to do it. Well, now that the FDA has basically said there's no longer a shortage on that product, we're going to see a lot of that compounding going away. So as we move forward, it's not going to happen tomorrow. It's not going to happen in a month from now, because most of those compounding facilities have really ramped up production to make sure that they would be able to get themselves to X amount of time. But it's not going anywhere, meaning that the whole movement towards those weight loss products are not going anywhere. So I do think on the international side, we're going to see a big push for folks who no longer can get that compounded product. Maybe are now self-pay because their insurance is no longer paying for it, but they want to stay on the product. If a product that's going to cost $1,100 here in the US can come from Canada for $400 or $500, people might say, well, listen, I want to go in that direction. So we're already seeing a lot of innovative brokers and advisors coming to us and saying, hey, what's going to happen if we can't get this? Can we continue to order them through Canada? And I can tell you as of right now, yes, that's going to be available. What's going to be interesting to see is if all of a sudden the shortage starts to be created again, will these drug companies continue to send enough medication to Canada where the Canadians can now sell it to to us here in the US for the less expensive price? Or will the Canadians be stepping in and saying, listen, we don't want to have a shortage in Canada, so we're going to restrict the amount of product that's going to be able to be shipped to the US? That'll be something that'll be interesting to see. I can tell you in the 23 years I've been doing this business, we've seen that before. One of the reasons why, Paul, you and I have talked about in the past that my partners and I have always used multiple pharmacies throughout Canada, also through England, in Australia, New Zealand. We want to be able to always source from tier one countries, but make sure that we have a robust supply and a robust relationship with several different pharmacy partners, not only in Canada, but throughout the world. So if we ever have to ship from one supply to another supply, we always have those options.
Yeah, well, I mean, I feel like we just covered the main things that are happening right now in this space. But I mean, what else are you watching right now? I feel like it's just so crazy.
I think the interesting thing in the pharmacy world has been definitely there's been a lot of talk, in some cases, the PBMs are the big bad boogeyman to all these legislatures. And not only at the federal level, but a lot of times at the state level now, a lot of legislators seem to be really want to pick on PBMs. And believe me, we can spend all day long talking about that PBMs caused a lot of their own problems. In the long run, or in general, I would say if you really have some of these true pass-through PBMs that are truly doing innovative work, they're really doing some great work to actually help lower the cost of prescriptions. Then on the other side, we can talk about the pharmaceutical industry and how the pharmaceutical industry is just raping and pillaging and making so much money, and they shouldn't be making as much money as they are. But I'm here to tell you that I'm not an anti-pharma guy, because I don't think that we would be living the healthy lives that we are, living as long as we are. I can tell you from family members of mine that 20 years ago wouldn't have been able to fight the fight that they fought against their cancer or their heart disease or their COPD. It's only because of pharmacology that we're able to live these longer, healthier lives now. So I think it's very, very difficult for me to say the PBMs are bad or the pharmaceutical industry is bad. I think the trend we're starting to see, though, is, at least in my world, is we're starting to have people actually question things like, well, wait a minute, if Eliquis is going to cost a senior citizen here $650, how is that same exact Eliquis available in Canada for $150 instead of $650? How are the Germans providing that product at $86, not $600? You start to ask those questions of why are other first world industrialized countries with advanced healthcare systems paying so much less for the same drugs that we're paying so much more for. And that's what we really have to look at, is why are Americans the only ones footing the bill for? We know that research and development is real. We know that it costs $1 billion to bring a drug to market. But the question that I've always asked for 23 years is, that's true, I get all that, but when do we start asking, when the Brits and the Canadians and the Aussies and the Kiwis start paying their fair share of that? And I think that's the shift that we're starting to see. And I can tell you, because I think 20 years ago, when I spoke to seniors especially, they were a 70-year-old 20 years ago when I started in the business. We're not as worldly as a 70-year-old today. You know what I mean? They weren't walking around with a smartphone in their hands. They didn't have access to the information. None of us did back then. The world has become a much smaller place because of communications and because of, I think, the World Wide Web and, just all of that can happen now. So people are more worldly, and it's easier to ask those kind of questions and to say, wait a minute, why are the Canadians paying so much less? So I think that's the big shift I would tell you that I'm seeing in the industry, is people in the industry and even folks that aren't in the industry are starting to ask those questions about why is healthcare so expensive here in the US, which is a good thing, because back in the day, until very recently, and I'm sure a lot of brokers will still argue that, the average employee or the average Medicare recipient doesn't really care or know what the true cost of care is. All they know is that their copayment went from a $25 copayment to a $35 copayment, or a $35 copayment to a $75 copayment. Their share of cost is now 20% instead of 10%. That's what people see, but they don't know what the real cost of the medication is, or of what the cost to go see a doctor is, or what the cost for a hospital stay is. So I think it's a good thing for our industry that not only brokers, but also employers, employees, and recipients of healthcare through the health insurance system are asking those questions, because I don't think people asked them just a few years ago.
Yeah, I agree with that. I also, speaking of questioning, Mark Cuban's moved into this space and he's shaking things up and everything. So what are your thoughts on that big move by him?
I love what Cuban's doing. Especially because now you get a celebrity name behind it. So again, it starts to allow consumer. Years ago, Paul, you'll remember, because you're not as old as I am, but you're certainly not as young as Lily is. So there was a whole conversation for a while, Lily, that was about healthcare consumerism. If we could just engage beneficiaries as consumers, we're going to lower the cost of care because people are going to shop all over for it. Well, number one, they didn't have the ability in some cases to shop for it. They didn't know what questions to ask. And if you're just paying a copayment, do you really care at the end of the day what it costs the employer or what it costs the federal government through Medicare? Not really. We could say we all care, but do we really care when we're just worried about going to see the doctor, or our baby is sick, or our husband or wife are sick? So when you bring somebody like Cuban in there and you have that marketing power behind it, where people start to be able to look and actually compare what their cost of prescription drugs are, that's a great thing. And there's a lot of other competitors with Cuban out there. So I think any time we can bring consumers of healthcare and have them start to be able to compare costs, that's a very, very good thing. The unfortunate thing for something like Cuban's program is the one place that we can actually negotiate and drive pricing down because of competition is in the generic drug world. And that's where groups like Cubans can really, really do a good job. But when you look at the brand name prescription drugs, when you look it up through their portal, you'll still notice that those drugs are through the roof. They're not very competitive, I should say, meaning they're all the same price of what somebody is paying local. And it's because there is no competition in that brand name product. There's nobody to help drive that price down like we see with generic drugs. Generic drugs are so much less expensive because you have 4 or 5 manufacturers driving the price down, competing with each other, to bring the price down. And that's the whole market forces that work in that benefit of that. Here in the United States, because there's no competition on the brand world, there's no justification for someone to try to lower the price. You want to get the best price you can. So even somebody like Cuban with the buying power that he has can't address the brand name drugs because the costs are so high there and there's no competition to drive it over. And that's where we see people drawn to international, because international that does create competition. If you can get that same exact Eliquis for $100 and something in Canada that you're paying $650 for here in the US, why wouldn't you go to Canada to buy the exact same drug manufactured in the exact same facility by the same manufacturer, one just labeled for sale in Canada and one labeled for sale in Tampa, Florida? Of course you're going to buy that less expensive medication. So I guess the long-winded answer is I love what Cuban's doing. I think it's great to bring the consumerism in, but it still doesn't address the issue that most folks struggle with, because they're not struggling with their $4 or $10 generic drug. They're struggling with their $650 Eliquis or their $6,000 Humira. You know what I mean? That's what's causing people to go bankrupt, and that's what's causing employers to have to cut back on health plans. It's not the generic drugs that 90% of the people that are taking. It's the 10% of the population that's taking the brand name drugs that's driving. I've seen statistics that say 10% of the population is driving as much as 70 or 80% of the overall healthcare cost to a plan. So
yeah, I've seen the same numbers within, like you said, the healthcare plans, that there's often those certain number of individuals that are impacting it. So, I'm glad that Lily brought up Cuban, because one of the things we try to do is focus on the leading edge of some of the changes. I mean, this is a entrenched industry in many ways, and there's, it's fighting against some powers that have been in place for a long time. So it's going to be a slow process, but at the same time, there's dozens of people, hundreds of people out there who are making big changes that are not as well known as Cuban, for example. I would consider you to be one of those people, because you have been pitching these ideas that to many employers and employees are, especially 20 years ago, but even today, probably somewhat out there. How are those conversations going about innovation and change? And how are you seeing people's attitudes shift towards innovation in general, but specifically around international medicine too?
Yeah, I mean, that's been a journey, I can tell you. I will tell you that in the last 5 years, the conversations we're having are so much more positive that we actually have people calling us now, asking how do we work together, where before it was a little bit of a heavier lift. I think a couple of things probably made that happen. Number one, my business partner often gets frustrated when she sees new people jumping into our world, doing international. Like, hey, where'd this guy come from? We've been doing this all this time. What's this guy doing here? And it gets kind of frustrating. I understand, because she's put so much time into building the business. But I've always had the opinion that it's not a bad thing to have people telling the same story, because we're not the only guy yelling from the rooftops that we can save people money by ordering drugs from Canada. Now we have other people telling the same story. The other thing is, I think we have advisors now that are coming in and making this part of their pitch to say, have you looked at this before? Whether they're trying to win business or it's when they're trying to hold on to the business that they currently have, and say, what can I do to help my clients save the most money they can, so we don't lose this client to somebody else who's coming in with innovative strategy. So I think that shift has happened big time in the last 5 years. I think the other thing that made that switch so much easier, though, for brokers and employers to accept it was when states like Florida passed their legislation that allowed for the state of Florida to actually implement international programs for their state employees, for them to purchase drugs from Canada for the Department of Corrections or for ultimately for their Medicaid systems. Then when you saw so many other states like Utah and like Colorado jump on board and do the same thing, it became a lot easier, number one, for brokers to start having those conversations with employers. And it became a lot harder, I think, for the folks that were pushing back to say, you're not allowed to do this, even though they could never really justify why you weren't allowed to do it. It was just, well, you're not allowed to do it. Well, it's hard to argue that when you're saying, well, the state of Florida is allowed to save $60 million through their Department of Corrections. But Jim Jones Manufacturing in, Illinois isn't allowed to save $600,000 for his employee group plan. Or worse than that, the state of Florida is allowed to save $60 million, but Mrs. Smith's not allowed to save 600 on her Eliquis. You know what I mean? It made the story a lot harder for them to argue that, somehow this wasn't allowed. So I think that change in industry with those big players like Florida, the second largest state in the union, and then you saw these other states hopping on board, you saw a real movement in that direction. The other thing I'll talk about from the states that's so interesting about this topic, and it's not just international prescriptions, it's just drug costs in general. You see states like Florida and Utah that have very, very conservative legislatures that are looking at innovative programs like ours. And then you have states like Vermont and New Hampshire and even California that are looking at the same type of innovative strategies. The reason why that's exciting to me as not only a business person, but as an American taxpayer is that we can't seem to get along on any political issue in this country. But the one issue that we can all get along with, whether you're a Republican or a Democrat, a conservative or a liberal, a blue or a red state, we all agree that prescription drug costs are way, way too high. And that's the one place where, whether it's in DC or if it's in some of the state houses throughout the country, I see that the two sides, the two parties, the two ideologies are coming together on that one issue and saying we need to do something about this. And that's exciting to me, because if we can have a conversation about something so important as prescription drug costs, maybe we can get to have some conversations about some other issues as well. So
we can only dream, right?
Being too fluffy about it, but I just it's one place that makes me feel like we're making some changes for the good, and both sides of the political aisle seem to be on board with that.
I think we could all use a little optimism and fluff these days, so I'll take it for sure.
Right. Good.
Yeah, I mean, I can only imagine how many ups and downs you've had explaining these ideas to people over, all the years of your career. I just can't imagine how many, repeating conversations, and because you're passionate, trying to get that point across, all of that. Between advisors, employers, and employees, where do you see the most adoption for these changes?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I'd have to say that we see people that are really, really adoptive, just looking to make changes within all three of those categories. And then we see some that are still pushing back. I talk about employers employees. And let's also talk about when I first started, I was just dealing with helping seniors, in Florida order drugs from Canada before we built what we've built. And I will tell you the difference between them and now, then and now with those guys is, I always say the average senior wasn't walking around with a smartphone in their hand. They didn't have access to Google. And if they did, they didn't really get it. A 70-year-old now is super, super tech savvy. They've been working in technology for 20 years. They're just leaving their employer. A lot of them are still employed, that type of thing. So it's a different conversation. And again, I think they're a more worldly consumer. So I think there's definitely innovation there. But I also think that a lot of employees sometimes feel entitled, and I don't mean entitled in a bad way. I mean entitled like they have health insurance and this is what their health insurance is supposed to do, and they don't necessarily want to go outside of that realm because that's the purpose of their insurance card. You know what I mean? So it's sometimes we see that there's more pushback from innovative solutions because it's just like, this is why I have health insurance. This is why I pay for my health insurance, and I don't want to have to make it more complicated than it is. From the broker side, I would definitely say that we're seeing a lot of innovative brokers. We're seeing guys, and Paul, you see them at all the different events that we go to, guys that are coming in with some really, really innovative ideas. The problem is those innovative ideas sometimes are not proven. There's like, well, we think if we do this and this and this, it'll work, or I've got this one example of this one employer group. Yeah, it's only a 100 life group and it's this and this and it's working there, but we don't know what it would work like on scale. So you see a lot of that. Sometimes the innovation, I think, is scary in some ways. And on the other side of it, you have a lot of brokers who are saying, hey, we're doing really, really well doing it the old fashioned way. Like, why do we really want to, shake up the apple cart? So you have both sides. You have the guy who's saying, let's burn the system down and then just, we'll build it back up from the ashes. And then you have some guys going, hey, I'm doing really well here without making any changes. Let's not do anything. So I think it's those folks in the middle who says we can't burn the system down, but we know it has to get better. How do we do that? And those are the consultants that I love working with because they know that they want to change the world, but they don't need to change the world tomorrow. They can change the world over a short period of time. And from employers, I would tell you, they're probably the ones that we see are probably really, really anxious to do some changes because really they're the ones getting their teeth kicked in. They're the ones who are trying to do the right thing. We work with a lot of generational, families that have owned a company for 3 generations. And the younger group that's trying to run the company now is saying, listen, my grandfather built this thing, but he didn't have healthcare costs like we do now. How do we do this? How do we innovate here? How do we do it? And they're the ones who are actually recognizing that if they don't do something innovative, they may not only lose their health plan, but they may lose their entire company because of the cost of health insurance. So I think I would tell you that I think the most innovative or the most willing to be innovative are some of those employers. And it's unfortunate because probably the reason they're more willing to be innovative is because they're truly have their backs against the wall. They don't know how, if they can't bring their costs down, how they're going to continue to be able to offer health insurance to their employees. So I would say everyone's innovative. The exciting thing is I think employers are probably the most anxious to be innovative because they're really feeling the pain the most.
That's interesting because I feel like that's a shift that's happened. I've heard a lot more about it from the advisors I talk to every day over the last 5-10 years, where there was a time where the employers were often pretty reluctant to change and they were kind of just in that keep it the way it is, it's not that bad mindset. And I agree with you. That's what I've been hearing is just something has shifted, and it's unfortunate that it's been driven by the fact that things have gotten so bad. But all of that aside, it is the employers now who are ready to make some of these changes.
That's what we're seeing. And again, I would agree with you. 5 years ago, you really had to win that employer over and convince him to do what you were suggesting. I'm seeing more and more of the employers who are saying now, man, we need to do something because I just don't know how we just can't keep this up.
So with all the pushback, I guess you touched on it a little bit with the advisors, sometimes giving a little pushback. Is there, besides employers, obviously, like you just said, is there a specific group that you feel the most pushback from, or is it all just kind of even keeled,
I think we get the pushback from some of what I would call the old guys like me in the industry who weren't innovators, who did really, really well for a long time and said, man, my world's starting to change now. Like I've got guys who used to come knocking on the door and I could always beat them at the pitch, you know what I mean? And now they're starting to actually win some of my cases over and things like that. Wait a minute, this guy came and maybe he didn't even lose it, but now, wait a minute, I have to actually start doing some things that are interesting. So we see that, I think, a little bit of the guys that I would call the old guys like me who have just been doing it for so long and doing very well at it, and now all of a sudden they've got to change their world. Someone's moved their cheese, I think is the term.
Right.
I see that. I think we definitely see that. We obviously see that there's definitely stakeholders in the industry, like whether it's carriers or pharmaceutical companies or whoever, who again are doing very, very well with the way the system is. I'm sure we've all heard. I think Lester Morales says it a lot. Healthcare is not broken. It's operating exactly the way it was, designed to work. It's just that the folks that it's broken for are the folks that are trying to utilize it. The folks that are benefiting from the current system are doing very, very well. You know what I mean? So we see some pushback from that. But I think that even some of those ingrained old groups of brokers and carriers and stuff are recognizing that the world is changing and that there's going to have to be a move to doing something different. And that doesn't mean we have to burn the system down. That's what I tell people all the time. The system is not perfect, but it still works pretty well. You know what I mean? Let's fix what needs to be fixed, and let's keep what's working right. And let's not just think we have to just start all over again. And I certainly would never encourage anybody to go to a European or a Canadian style healthcare system. And I'll make this point just because I think it's very, very important, is we work with 16 different pharmacies throughout the world: Canada, England, Australia, New Zealand, Turkey, Israel, Australia, all over the place. And to a person, when I speak to the physicians or the pharmacists that run those companies, they tell me that if they needed healthcare or their sick family member, their child, their parents needed healthcare, the United States of America is where they would want to be to get their healthcare. Now, they don't know how they would afford it, but this is where they want to be to get their healthcare. We as Americans have access to the best healthcare system in the world. We have access to treatments that other countries don't have. We have access to medications that other countries don't have. This is where you want to be if you're really, really sick. You can get the treatments that you can't get in other parts of the world. The problem is, how do we afford that healthcare? And how do we make the changes so that employers can continue to offer quality healthcare to their employees, and how individuals can access affordable healthcare for themselves here in the U.S.? That's the big question that we need to answer.
Yeah, I love that. Well, I mean, obviously you're very excited and passionate about this, and I think you're an optimist is the way that I, from our conversations, I think you're very optimistic. But I mean, obviously this gets discouraging at times. It grinds you down. I know that from talking to people across the industry who are trying to change a system that is not easy to change. So how do you kind of not get discouraged? How do you not get intimidated while you're trying to, be at the forefront of change in this industry? And I'm talking about you personally.
Booze.
There you go.
No, I'm kidding. You know what? I think you've got to wake, at least for me, I got to wake up and feel like we're fighting a fight. You know what I mean? If that's the way, at least I motivate myself. I often tell myself, we're Robin Hood and they're the sheriff of Nottingham. You know what I mean? We're doing the right thing. We're fighting for the people that, that we need to fight for. And again, we're not doing it by robbing from anybody and giving to somebody else. We're introducing new strategies to help lower those costs. But I would tell you, Paul, that's how I think I keep myself motivated after 23 years of a lot of frustration, but also quite honestly, a lot of successes. I mean, each time you help somebody who, and this is going to sound really, really corny, but we hear stories on a weekly basis in our office where somebody would call and say, you know what, guys, I just want to let you know that I was literally going to stop taking my medication because I just couldn't afford it anymore. You know what I mean? I talked to a guy the other day who he's 10 years older than his wife. He's getting sick. He's been taking all these different cancer treatments and these different medications. And he called and spoke to me last week. And he said, I just want to tell you, I really appreciate what your staff did for me because I was literally going to stop taking my medications because I know that I've only got a couple of years left anyway. But what I feel like is I'm spending through all of the life savings that my wife and I worked on. And my wife's 10 years younger. She still has a long time to live. And she's going to be living in a poorhouse, not because she did anything wrong, because I got sick. You know what I mean? And I had to say to him too, you didn't do anything wrong by getting sick. But the conversation, I guess what I'm saying is you're motivated when I think you believe in what you're doing. And when the people you're helping are actually giving you that positive feedback, that's a good thing. And that's an individual. I mean, I can tell you the same stories about talking to employers who have said, you guys actually were able to save us enough money that we were able to, because we were really literally considering either shutting our doors or at least telling employees that we just can't give them health coverage anymore. You know what I mean? So I think you got to find the motivation. You got to focus on the victories, savor the victories, and move on to the next one. And I guess wipe the dust off, stand up, and keep fighting when you get knocked down every once in a while. Because believe me, in 23 years we've been knocked down quite a bit, and we've been fighting the biggest gorilla in the room, being the establishment, healthcare system, the established pharmaceutical industry. But we're still here 23 years later because I think we're Robin Hood and they're the sheriff of Nottingham, and Robin Hood usually wins at the end, So
I love that. Doesn't sound corny to me at all. I think it's so easy to see the stats and hear about rising healthcare costs and see numbers and percentages, but I can only imagine the power of hearing those individual stories is a big part of it. So yeah, no, I love that answer.
I also feel like in this industry, we talk about how it's changing all the time and what can we change more and all this stuff. But in terms of people actually in the industry trying to make that change, how can this industry continue to improve when it comes to innovating, adapting, and bringing in younger and more diverse candidates?
Well, I can tell you that I was one of those guys that for a while, as I watched myself getting gray and fat and old, and realized that I was a young guy in the industry when I first started doing this. And I didn't see a lot of young people coming into the industry. But as I go to your event every year, Paul, and I go to these different events, I'm starting to recognize a lot more young professionals that are recognizing that this is an industry that not only can you do very, very well financially, but you can do very, very well, meaning do good for the world. You know what I mean? You can actually make a difference in things. And I'm noticing that. And it's exciting to me to see some of these younger folks that are coming in and are recognizing. And quite honestly, they're coming in with ideas that I don't think we ever really thought of. You know what I mean? Because they don't know the old way that we used to do things and that we're still trying to work our way out of. They're coming in with some super cool, innovative ideas that, sometimes you want to go, yeah, well, and then you go, wait, yeah, well, that might work. Let's try something like that. So to me, that's kind of where I think it's pretty cool. And if you would have said that to me a few years ago, I didn't see the young folks coming in. I didn't see that this is a super exciting industry for young folks to become involved in. But I think with some of the changes in technology and some of the technology groups that you see coming in and making some innovative things there, I'm seeing more younger folks coming into the industry that I think is making a huge positive impact on the future changes. Because I can tell you right now, I was, a pretty innovative, years ago, and I still think of myself as an innovative business person, but nowhere near as innovative as some of these young folks that I see coming into the industry now. I mean, they're doing things or thinking about things that I just wouldn't even have thought about. You know what I mean? So it's pretty cool.
I love that. I'm seeing that same shift. And like you said, even when you go to a conference like ours, just looking out at the crowd from the stage over the last 10 years, it's amazing the transformation that's happened in exactly the ways that you're talking about. So yeah, it's fun. Well, we are almost done with kind of the business side, but we're going to ask you a few more fun questions here in a second about you. But before we do that, we always like to put our guests on the spot here at the end and just ask you to finish this sentence with a couple words or a paragraph, whatever works. And the sentence is, the thing that makes me most excited about the future of our industry is...
And I think I'm going to follow up with what I just said, young folks. I think seeing those young faces that are actually coming into the industry and making changes that, old guys like me don't even have the brain power to think about. You know what I mean? These guys, that's what I get most excited about, I think, is seeing young folks and the technology. I think that's really going to make a big impact on things that, again, I couldn't even have imagined 20 years ago that's happening now in the industry. So I think young minds and new technologies is what makes me so excited about the future of the industry.
Love it. Love it. Well, yeah, like I said, now what we think will be the fun part, although a couple of our previous guests seemed like maybe they struggled with this part more than I expected, but we're just going to ask you some fun questions about yourself. So as we've discussed, this industry can be pretty rough on people, especially over the years as you have a long career and those who are trying to create change. So what do you do with your family or your friends to kind of just relax and refresh when you're off the clock?
Well, I said to you earlier that I'm on the road all the time. I say I love to travel. My family loves to travel, but for me, I like to actually be at home and have a home cooked meal and watch the kids dance or play basketball. My girls are getting to in their high school years, starting to look at colleges and things like that. So my wife and I are recognizing that we're running out of that time of the stuff that we think is so constantly on the run, going to games and doing all these different things. And you're going, man, I wish I just had a few hours to myself. But I know in a couple of years I'm going to miss that. So whenever I am home and I'm not on the road, I like to have a home cooked meal and go to a high school girls basketball game. That's pretty much the perfect relaxation for me. But you know what? We live in Florida, so we do a lot of boating. We do a lot of fishing. I don't play golf anymore because until I can actually devote, a couple of games a week where I can feel like I'm actually getting better, I'm not going to do it again. Florida's a fun place to live, so there's always something to do here.
Yeah, nice. For sure. My mom actually lives in Florida, so I get it. It's always fun to go out there, be outside in the sun, or even just, have our home cooked meal outside. It's always fun.
Now, just so you know, if we have this conversation in a couple months in August, I may not feel the same way about going outside.
Yeah, that's fair. My mom feels the exact same way. It gets sticky down there. But okay, next question. Sorry. Paul and I were English majors. We're pretty big bookworms. So what industry or business book would you recommend? Or just, any kind of book that you're reading for fun right now?
I love all of Marty McCarty's books, even from back before he was the FDA commissioner. I got to say I had dinner with Marty. You know what I mean? He used to have my phone number in his cell phone. I don't think he does anymore. Marty McCarty's stuff is, especially if you read the evolution of the stuff he was talking about 10 years ago. Some of the things that you're starting to see to come to the industry now is if someone's looking to read something just about the industry and about innovation, I think you can read through Marty's stuff from 10 years ago and recognize that a lot of that's coming to fruition now. So that would be my recommendation. If anybody looking for a book, or heck, even if not looking for a book, if you work in the industry, you got to read Marty's books.
Perfect. Well, you're obviously on plenty of podcasts, including ours. I know that you are usually behind the microphone, but when you're on the other end of things, do you have any favorite podcasts, either within the industry or we're open to outside the industry too?
You know what? I'm a history guy, so I don't even know. I just kind of go and find some of the history podcast stuff. I'm a longtime 20-year NABIT member, so I always like to go to, their happy hours and do some of their different ones. I think there's always some innovative stuff going on out there, but I think that's what I would probably say. I'm going to go towards some kind of a history something, which I don't even know what it would be, or some of the NABIT podcasts that they're doing, I think are pretty cool.
Nice. That's a good answer. I know I like some of the history ones too. There's one called Hardcore History that I listen to sometimes that's really good.
I've heard that one. Heard that one. It's really good. They tell some of the stories too that you don't see in the history books. You know what I mean?
Exactly. So, no, it's nice. For sure.
Well, Chelsea had a lot of trouble answering this question. So let's see if you can answer it as well. What album or song do you have on repeat these days?
Wow. You know what? I don't even think I have an album anymore. I just kind of flip through the whatever's on there. My Pandora kind of knows what I like, so I'm an old school Blink 182 guy. So if I usually put something from Blink, and then it just kind of flips through all that 90s style California post grunge type sound. Every once in a while, I'll do like the Kenny Chesney type sound when I'm in that Florida mood where you get kind of that Buffett Chesney beachy thing. Not that I'm not a country guy, but I'm more into the water Chesney, the boat Chesney stuff. So I would say the Chesney Buffett stuff would probably be that's my Florida go-to, I would say.
And I assume to listen to that, you have to change into some kind of Hawaiian or flamingo-based shirt, right?
Either that or just a really old beat up, sun-stained, T-shirt and a pair of flip-flops is kind of the way to go. Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah, my dad always says that country music sounds better on a boat with a beer in your hand.
Amen. Well, I think everything's better on a boat with a beer in your hand.
Yeah, that's fair.
I'm not a big rap guy, but I can probably, if you put me on a boat with some cold beer, I'd listen to whatever music you put on.
Good stuff. Well, we talked about you're on the road all the time, and I know that a lot of it is business travel, but I would assume you've also been on, some pretty fun trips over the years. So we'll close out by just asking you, what's the best trip you've ever taken, for fun?
I'll tell you that very recently. Well, this was for fun for sure, but it's also, as you know, my business partners live in Auckland, New Zealand. So I was able to just recently go visit them in Auckland for the first time after working with them for 16 years. I traveled to Auckland for the first time just a few weeks ago. And everybody I know that's ever traveled to New Zealand says that if they have one trip that they could ever do again, it would be New Zealand. And even though I only got to visit the North Island, I would say the same thing. Recently, though, my wife and my kids for spring break, we went to a place called South Caicos, which is part of the Turks and Caicos Islands, but it's a lot less populated, where if you go to the main Grand Cayman Grand Turks or provinciales, it's a lot more built up. I always say I feel like I'm in South Florida. They got the Ritz-Carlton and the Waldorf and all the fancy hotels, and I might as well be in Miami at that point. But South Caicos, we had to take one of those little 15-minute puddle jumpers to South Caicos, and they won't allow them to build over 2 stories there, so you don't get all the big, huge resorts and stuff. And if you want to talk about the prettiest place I've ever been, looking down the beach in both directions and not seeing anybody, to me, that was a pretty cool thing, because I just see how quickly Florida has grown in the 30 years I've been here, and how the Caribbean has just grown and grown and grown. And to be somewhere like that hadn't grown yet was pretty darn cool.
Oh, that's an amazing answer. And I will just say kudos to you. I can't believe that you waited 16 years. You had a perfect excuse to get to New Zealand and you didn't take it. So
I know. Well, you know what, Paul? I always said I was going to do it when I could bring the family and go and do the whole 2-3 weeks, whatever. And I finally just said, we're not waiting anymore. We have too much going on. And Casey gets to come over here and visit us 3-4 times a year. I said, this time we're going to go over and do it. So well worth it. If you can ever do it, go spend your American dollars down there in New Zealand, because, by the way, the exchange rate's pretty darn good right now. So if you're going to do it soon.
Nice. Even more motivation. Well, Bill, thank you so much for joining us on the show today. It's been great catching up with you, and we really appreciate your time.
Thanks, Paul. Appreciate it. Thanks, Lily.
For all of our listeners, please subscribe to Beyond Benefits with Benefits Pro anywhere you get your podcasts. And if you want to rate us, we'd love your feedback. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to email me over at pwilson@benefitspro.com, or you can email Lily at lpeterson@alm.com.
And thank you to our producer, Zach. Join us again next time for a new episode of Beyond Benefits with Benefits Pro. Until then, thanks for listening.